introduce myself. My name is Becca. I'm the adult librarian at the North Branch. I'm glad we could have this program tonight. I want to thank Mr. Jim Knight for presenting for us. If you do have any questions, you can type them in the chat box and we'll get to those at the end. I do want to share a couple pieces of information. If you haven't used our seed bank yet, or we're interested in maybe planting something new this year, we still have lots of seeds available. This year we're asking you to fill out a request online, or you can pick a paper form up inside one of our locations, and we'll get those seeds put together for you for pickup. Tomorrow night, we're going to be having author Jane Ann Terzillo. She will be joining us and talking about her book, Wicked Women of Ohio. I do want to point out that we have lots of other technology and maker programs going on. So I encourage everybody to head over to our website and check those out. So I am going to give things over to Mr. Henry David Thoreau.
Thank you very much. It's an interesting way to have a lyceum or lecture, as it would have been in my day, especially over this kind of device. And I want to start off by saying I will be sharing from a few of my pieces tonight, as the time is short. I want to be talking just a little bit about what my values were and why the pieces I chose reflected those best. As many of you know, in the 1800s, I built a house on the shores of Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts. I lived there 2 years and 2 months. And during that time, I was trying an experiment with trying to be a part of and capture the present moment, amongst other things, because I was following the transcendentalist tradition of trying to find divinity and the sacred in nature and within. But it was also being true to oneself and one's values. And so with that, during the time when the Mexican War was taking place, when our country was trying to annex Texas, and it would also mean making war on Mexico, but also, unfortunately, to expand slavery. That was something I had to stand against, as my parents' home was part of the Underground Railroad, and I tried to help in that situation as well. So I'll be sharing tonight from one of my earlier lectures, Life Without Principle, then some pieces from Walden, then from Resistance to Civil Government, or as you may know it as Civil Disobedience. And then at the tail end, I'm going to close from how I closed Walden, as I described my experiment, and I feel like it maybe also describes my whole life experience, the experiment of my life. At a lyceum not long since, I felt that the lecturer had chosen a theme too foreign to himself, and so failed to interest me as much as he might have done. He described things not in or near to his heart, but toward his extremities and superficies. There was in this sense no truly central or centralizing thought in the lecture. I would have had him deal with his privatist experience as the poet does. The greatest compliment that was ever paid me was when one asked me what I thought and attended to my answer. I am surprised as well as delighted when this happens. Such a rare use he would make of me, as if he were acquainted with the tool. Commonly, if men want anything of me, is only to know how many acres I make of their land, since I am a surveyor, or at most, what trivial news I have burdened myself with. I take it for granted when I'm invited to lecture anywhere, or I've had a little experience in that business, that there is a desire to hear what I think on some subject, though I may be the greatest fool in the country, and not that I should say pleasant things merely, or as such as the audience will assent to. And I resolve accordingly to give them a strong dose of myself. They have sent for me, engaged to pay for me, and I am determined that they shall have me, though I bore them beyond all precedent. So now I would say something similar to you, my readers. Since you are my readers, and I have not been much of a traveler, I will not talk about people 1,000 miles off, but come as near home as I can. As the time is short, I will leave out all the flattery and retain all the criticism. let us consider the way in which we spend our lives. This world is a place of business. What an infinite bustle. I'm awaked almost every night by the panting of the locomotive. It interrupts my dreams. There is no Sabbath. It would be glorious to see mankind at leisure for once. It is nothing but work, work, work. I say that there is nothing, not even crime, more opposed to poetry, to philosophy, nigh to life itself, than this incessant business. If a man walk in the woods for love of them half of each day, he's in danger of being regarded as a loafer. But if he spends his whole day as a speculator, shearing off those woods and making earth bald before her time, he's esteemed an industrious and enterprising citizen, as if a town had no interest in its forests, but to cut them down. The aim of the laborer should be not to get his living or to get a good job, but to perform well a certain work. And even in a pecuniary sense, it would be economy for a town to pay its laborers so well that they would not feel that they were working for lowly ends or merely for a livelihood, but for scientific or even moral ends. Do not hire a man who does your work for love, for money, but him who does it for love of it. And I see young men, my townsmen, whose misfortune it is to have inherited farms, houses, barns, cattle, and farming tools, for these are more easily acquired than got rid of. Better if they had been born in the open pasture and suckled by a wolf, that they might have seen with clear eyes what field they were called to labor in. Who made them serfs of the soil? Why should they eat their 60 acres of ground when man is condemned to eat only his peck of dirt? Why should they begin digging their graves as soon as they are born? But men labor under a mistake. The better part of the man is soon plowed into the soil for compost by a seeming fate, commonly called necessity. They are employed, as it says in an old book, laying up treasures which moth and rust will corrupt, and thieves break through and steal. It is a fool's life, as they will find when they get to the end of it, if not before. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. My purpose in going to Walden Pond was not to live cheaply there, nor to live dearly there, but to transact some private business with the fewest obstacles. I do not propose to write an ode to dejection, but to brag as lustily as a chanticleer in the morning, standing on his roost, if only to wake my neighbors up. Every morning was a cheerful invitation to make my life of equal simplicity, and I may say of innocence, with nature herself. I got up early and bathed in the pond. That was a religious experience, and one of the best things which I did. The morning, which is the most memorable season of the day, is the awakening hour. Then there is least somnolence in us, and for an hour at least, some part of us awakes, which slumbers all the rest of the day and night. The Vedas say all intelligences awake in the morning. To him whose elastic and vigorous thought keeps pace with the sun, the day is a perpetual morning. To be awake is to be alive. Never yet met a man who was quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face? We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or carve a statue, and so make a few objects beautiful. But it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere of the medium through which we look, which morally we can do to affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. Every man is tasked to make his life, even in its details, worthy of the contemplation of his most elevated and critical hour. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation, unless it were quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its meanest terms, and if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world. Or if it were sublime, to know it by experience, be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion. Our life is frittered away by detail. An honest man has hardly need to count more than his 10 fingers, or in extreme cases, he may add his 10 toes and lump the rest. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3, not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. Simplify, simplify. Instead of 3 meals a day, eat but 1 if necessary. Instead of 100 dishes, 5, and reduce all other things in proportion. Why should we live with such hurry and waste of life? We are determined to be starved before we are hungry. Let us spend one day as deliberately as nature, and not be thrown off the track by every nutshell and mosquito's wing that falls on the rails. Sometimes in a summer morning, having taken my accustomed bath, I sat in my sunny doorway from sunrise till noon, wrapped in a reverie amidst the pines and the hickories and sumacs, in undisturbed solitude and stillness, while the birds would sing and round and flitted noiseless throughout the house, until by the sun falling in at my west window, with the noise of some traveler's wagon on the distant highway, I was reminded of the lapse of time. I grew in those seasons like corn in the night, and they were far better than any work of the hands would have been. They were not time subtracted from my life, but so much over and above the usual allowance. For the most part, I minded not how the hours went. Every day or two, I strolled in the village to hear some of the gossip which is incessantly going on there, circulating either from mouth to mouth or from newspaper to newspaper. One afternoon, near the end of the first summer, when I went to the village to get a shoe from the cobblers, I was seized and put into jail because I did not pay a tax to or recognize the authority of the state, which buys and sells men, women, and children like cattle at the door of its Senate house. I heartily accept the motto, that government is best which governs least. And I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which I also believe, that government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Government is at best but an expedient, but most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. The objections which have been brought against a standing army, they are many and weighty, and deserve to prevail, may also at last be brought against a standing government. The government which itself, which is only the mode that the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool. For in the outset, the people would not have consented to this measure. But speak practically and as a citizen, unlike those who call themselves no government men, I ask for not at once no government, but at once a better government. Let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step towards obtaining it. Must the citizen ever for a moment or in the least degree resign his conscience to the legislator? Why has every man a conscience then? Law never made man a whit more just, and by means of their respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents of injustice. How does it become a man to behave toward the American government today? I answer that he cannot without disgrace be associated with it. I cannot for an instant recognize that political organization as my government, which is the slaves' government also. This people must cease to hold slaves and to make war on Mexico, though it cost them their existence as a people. Practically speaking, the opponents to a reform in Massachusetts are not 100,000 politicians at the South, but 100,000 merchants and farmers here who are more interested in commerce and agriculture than they are in humanity, and are not prepared to do justice to the slave and to Mexico, cost what it may. I quarrel not with far-off foes, but with those who here, near at home, cooperate with and do the bidding of those far away and without whom the latter would be harmless. Practically speaking, if I devote myself to other pursuits and contemplations, I must first see at least that I do not pursue them sitting upon another man's shoulders. I must get off him first, that he may pursue his contemplations too. Those who, while they disapprove of the character and measures of a government, yield to it their allegiance and support, are undoubtedly its most conscientious supporters, and so frequently the most serious obstacles to reform. If the injustice is of such that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say, break the law. Let your life be a counter friction to stop the machine. What I have to do at any rate is see that I do not lend myself to the wrong which I condemn. Moreover, any man more right than his neighbors constitutes a majority of one already. Under a government which imprisons unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison. It is there that the fugitive slave and the Mexican prisoner on parole and the Indian come to plead the wrongs of his race should find them. Cast your whole vote, not a strip of paper merely. If the tax gatherer or any other public officer asks me, as one has done, but what shall I do? My answer is, if you really wish to do anything, resign your office. If the subject has refused allegiance and the officer has resigned from office, then the revolution is accomplished. But even suppose blood should flow. Is there not a sort of blood shed when the conscience is wounded? I have paid no poll tax for 6 years. I was put into a jail once on this account for one night. I did not feel for a moment confined, and the walls seemed a great waste of mortar and stone. As they could not reach me, they had resolved to punish my body. Just as boys, if they cannot come at some person against whom they have a spite, will abuse his dog. I was not born to be forced. I will breathe after my own fashion. Let us see who is the strongest. What force has a multitude? They can only force me who obey a higher law than I. They force me to become like themselves. When I meet a government which says to me, your money or your life, why should I be in such haste to give it my money? When I came out of prison, for someone interfered and paid that tax. I did not perceive that great changes had taken place on the common, and yet a change had come to my eyes. over the scene. I saw yet more distinctly the state in which I lived. I saw to what extent the people among whom I lived could be trusted as good neighbors and friends, that their friendship was for summer weather only. This may be to judge my neighbors harshly. I do not wish to quarrel with any man or nation. The authority of the government, even such as I am willing to submit to, for I will cheerfully obey those who know better and can do better than I. And in many of these things, who neither know nor can do as so well, this government is still an impure one. To be strictly just, it must have the sanction and consent of the governed. It can have no pure right over my person and property, but what I can see to it. I please myself with imagining a state at last which can afford to be just to all men and to treat the individual with respect as a neighbor. A state which bore this kind of fruit and suffered it to drop off as fast as it ripened would prepare the way for a still more perfect and glorious state, which I have also imagined, but not yet anywhere seen. I learned this, at least by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now, put the foundations under them. Some are dead in our years that we Americans and moderns generally are intellectual dwarfs compared with the ancients or even the Elizabethan men. But what is that to the purpose? A living dog is better than a dead lion. Let everyone mind his own business and endeavor to be what he was made. Why should we be in such desperate haste to succeed and in such desperate enterprises? If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music that he hears, however measured or far away. The light which puts out our eyes is darkness to us. Only that day dawns to which we are truly awake. There is more day to dawn. The sun is but a morning star. I thank you.
All right, thank you so much. If anybody has a question, they should be able to submit a to the Q&A box, the question and answer box. So we will give everyone a minute. So Jim, I do have a question for you. What made you decide to want to look into Thoreau?
I'd sort of been interested in, I hadn't really read much of him back when I was in middle school, but I knew about Walden, and I liked the concept, the idea of individuality that he wrote about. And years later, I read more of him. I wanted to understand him in that era and the influence at the time with many of the writers. And from Ralph Waldo Emerson as well, who was a friend and mentor for a long period, as well as so many others, that were part of the transcendentalist movement. And just see what they were about, see how that work influenced him, and what inspired him. And I just found that interesting. He was very unique and different, very complex. And even today, sometimes he writes in a way and speaks in a way that can be provocative and challenging, almost preachy, as some may say, but he's trying to provoke. He's trying to get people to think and take a look. He doesn't want them to imitate him necessarily just to go off to the woods, but he does, other than having that connection and appreciation with nature, he's trying to urge them to really examine themselves and examine their world and life in general.
Yeah, I haven't read a whole lot of him or Emerson really, but everything that I have, I've really enjoyed. So let me see here. I'm not seeing any questions. And I don't see anybody raising their hand or anything like that. So I am going to thank you once again. We really appreciate it. And thank everybody for joining us. So have a good night.
Right. Thank you very much, everybody. You enjoyed it.